This work goes back to 2015. So I've been doing this stuff for feels like a very, very long time. And the issue for me was when I was teaching 200 level classes, like there has to be a writing component. And writing is gen ed. I don't teach English. There has to be writing. And so I, like I'm sure many faculty members, when they first started teaching said, oh, research paper. Because if you look at what types of writing are out there, and we're looking at, not so much English writing, there's kind of two types of writing that typically happen in non-English classes. And I'm sure these happen in English classes also, but you've got things that are in this writing to learn bucket. So these are short, informal writing tasks. They're key concepts. They're not formally graded. They often happen in class. I'd ask for examples of that, but I don't feel like we have a lot of teachers overall. So some examples of this would be reaction papers, write down an example, journaling. That stuff is writing to learn. I have never been able to figure out personally how to effectively use those kind of super low grade assessments. To me, it feels like in psych, at least, they're kind of junky. They often, if they don't understand the content, they don't express it that well. And I have them doing so many other things in my class that I don't want to add, floofy stuff. So I don't do a lot of this. So my focus is on writing and discipline and how to fix the problem of the large term paper. So what happened to me probably happened to most people. They got in there, they were rosy cheeked, they just came out of great grad school, right? Everything is great. I do all my homework. I know how to write. And then that first research paper comes in, you're like, holy crud. Like, these are terrible. And every single time I would assign them weekend and weekend and weekends. And, some of the students got it, but a lot of them, they were just disaster papers. And I realized at some point, they don't have the skills for this. Like, what am I even thinking? Like, they're coming here, they're at a community college, who knows what they're coming in with. And we don't have an English requirement. So they're landing in my 200 level classes. Some of them haven't had English 101, much less English 102. And how the heck am I expecting them to figure out how to write a research paper in discipline? Like, this is not workable. So I threw all of that away and started going with shorter writing assignments. And I was able to get these in a good place fairly easily in Psych 100 because the assignments are fairly short. And the requirements in terms of writing and discipline are relatively low. We're focusing mostly there on content and application of content. So this was not so hard. Eventually I figured out how to write interesting prompts and give them choices, and everything was cool. My 200 level classes, not so much. Okay. So my goal for them when they leave a 200 level class is if they walked into a 300 level psychology class at whatever, Harvard, University of Illinois, I don't care, that they could do the writing. Because at that level, it's going to be write a term paper, period. Okay? Midterm, final term paper. And they're going to see that a lot. And so they have to have those skills, or I feel like I failed doing my job. So it's been a labor of love. Okay? And so I've been collecting data since 2015, trying to fix the situation. So we're going to look a little bit at the old data, and then we'll look at the new data. And so we're going to walk you through a bunch of things that I've done in my class to try to improve this situation. And I think now I'm in a pretty good place. And coincidentally, the way my essays are set up for my 200 level class, they seem fairly ChatGPT proof. This is not the case in my 100 level class, but that is another talk. And I see that after me, there is a talk on ChatGPT and AI. So stick around for that. I can't remember who's presenting it. I just read it over
Jeannie
there.
Anderson.
Jeannie Anderson, fantastic. Adjunct English, yeah? Okay. She's on faculty development. Let me see if there's anything else in here I need to talk about. I think we know most of these things. They need to be writing. They need to be writing in ideally all of their classes. Okay. But we need to also get them writing in the discipline. So when they hit those 300 level classes, they don't just, and that should not be the first time they're encountering that kind of writing. Okay. So I have a lot of background here proving that I went and looked at things and did research and didn't just make up all this stuff. But again, we're all aware writing skills are important. They're important at two-year schools. We know that there are some logistical problems if you don't teach English, especially. We have very large class sizes. Right? So 30 students, like, you cannot take up your whole class with a draft, another draft, to draft again. Like, that does not work. So you've got to build it into the front end. is what I've realized. Ways to force them into getting closer to writing with discipline, and then getting them closer and closer throughout the semester is what I feel like is effective. And I will show you how we did that. We know, of course, our students may have additional challenges than if we were teaching, you know, a 200 level class at Harvard, for example. And here are some voices from students, which I will not read to you. So let me just eyeball this. So just a student assuming that English, whatever works in English is going to work in psychology. Not surprising. Then there's a lot of words on this slide. So I sat here and kind of brainstormed what are some of the challenges for those of us. I've probably talked about a lot of these things already. I do want to point out that I really feel like there is a privilege issue here for sure, because of the students coming in who may not have had rigorous English in the past. So for sure we have that going on. And so I think that sorry, I may offend some people during this talk. So if you're that person who assigns the large research paper in a 200 level class, I apologize in advance. Okay. But what they want feedback, obviously, for sure. I've looked at, a lot of times they will say, you know, can we get an example of a paper? And then what happens is they all just write the same paper. It's not very effective. So you have to have that early stuff not be bad, ideally. We have challenges because faculty who are not English teachers do not have information on teaching writing. Like, that is not our skill set. So it takes a lot of extra stuff, and hopefully this can bridge it. By the way, everyone is welcome to reshare this with whoever you want to. Absolutely. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that like the one draft final giant research paper is probably not a great idea. So here's what I was doing. My very first project, what I did was I changed all my essay prompts to require students to actually do research. And by research, I don't mean pawing through journal articles. I mean doing real things in the real world. Okay? So a lot of these are interview based. And my students will say, oh my God, I actually like learned all kinds of things about my family by doing these. Some are observation based, go out and watch something. Some are go out and find some infant toys and analyze them. Based on what you know in the literature, do they work? Are they good for physical development? So those are the types of essays. This is just one example. So you'll notice that it's saying interview two parents here with psychological differences. And these were my original prompts. So I tried to give them guidance on what to talk about. And I found out that these did not work still. Okay. And at the time I had my course set up, so all my writing assignments were worth the same amount. This is a better prompt than what a lot of people might start off with, which is these really dry prompts, right? Just tell me about this stuff. So this is really application focused. But what was still happening is that the first assignment was coming in and they just were not like where they should be. And then they're getting a lot of, hopefully, I think, constructive criticism, but that's not how they're reading it. So I wanted even more as we moved on. But my original one looked at the difference between prompts like this and very standard essay prompts. And like I said, this is super old. And so I was comparing across courses. And what I found out that 218, which are my nursing students, this is lifespan development. When they started the class at the beginning, they were less interested than the 212 students, but by the time they got to the end, they were equally interested. And then of course I did, you know, a lot of asking them about different things. We found that in 218, which is where we had the more investigative prompts, they said they were more interesting. They also said they were harder. I mean, they have to do actual outside work, right? But they also said that they learned more. So I was like, okay, I am going in the right direction. The direction is correct. Okay? So based on the current research project, there are two manipulations that I did. One of them, so the baseline condition looks at these investigative prompts like I just explained. So now we're throwing away the generic prompts. And then the next thing I tried was including really detailed direction for subtopics. So the way these essays are set up, standard psychology, introduction, tell me what you're going to tell me. 3 support paragraphs with different topics that you've told me in the introduction. For each support paragraph, talk about what the course concepts are and integrate them with what's going on with your observations. Now, what it didn't give them is potential lists of what those 3 subtopics should be. And so I would have some students out in outer space, okay, and they had options. So there's 3 or 4 options for what they get to choose. But still, I mean, they were all over the place. They were off topic. They were in different sections of the book. I was like, this is still not good. Okay. My students coming in who know all the things are acing this, and other students are they're just lost and confused. So I'm like, I have to give them more. So I'll show you an example of what I gave them with the same essay prompt. Might as well do that now, and then we can come back to that. If I have an example, here it is. Okay, so the original writing prompt we already saw, okay? And then I added all of this stuff onto the end of it to give them even more guidance, like trying to lead them to water. So you can see this is a lot of stuff, okay? But I'm giving them suggestions, like you could break this down into physical, cognitive, and social aspects. And again, you can see I'm being even more clear based on essays that came in on those. Don't just say cognition, you need something specific. Are you talking about memory? Are you talking about attention? What are you talking about? Okay, and there's a whole giant list of this. So when they're trying to figure out what to talk about, they now have, not only can they pick and choose their essay, they can pick and choose the subtopics. Okay, and they don't have to use these. They can go outside these. These are always just an examples. So that was manipulation 1. And you can see the details on where this data is from. Now, a big problem with this data is COVID. These are all online sections, so it was less of a problem, but my guess is that COVID changed who was enrolling, particularly in online 218. My guess is that we had more students and a wider variety of students. So that may have done some weird things to my data. Okay, second variable. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to deal with is a door in the face problem. So students walk in, they're still lost. Even with all of this guidance, they're still lost. They go in, they write the first paper, and I give auditory feedback for the first and second rounds. Students like that better. I don't know if I have that data in there, but it exists, I promise. It's long. And it's like, well, this needs to be fixed and this needs to be fixed. And your introduction isn't listing your topics in the same order. And it's an awful lot. Okay. And because my points were all the same, that means that you had a lot of students doing quite poorly on the first assignment, which was worth a lot of points. And obviously that's discouraging, right? So you're in the class, maybe you're not even doing so great on the exams. And then you get this first thing back and it's like 5 minutes of talk from your teacher about what all needs to be fixed. And you probably go, oh crap, okay. Can I even do this? Should I even be here? And I was like, this is not good. Like, how can I change this? And as I was snooping around in the literature, I ran across the not, exactly earth-shattering idea that there's no reason that if you're assigning 4 essays, that they all have to be worth 40 points. Okay? There's a rule that says that. I like consistency. I like everything to be the same, but there's nobody that's going to come and yell at me if I change that situation. And so I had posts, and then of course they have to do replies to other students' posts. And I took all those points and I just redivided them. Okay? I also removed, hi, welcome. I also removed the reply post from the beginning of the semester, figuring they just need to focus on how to write a post. They don't need to write a post and then 2 days later they write a reply, and they're making the same mistakes in both situations. And so they're getting double penalized. So let's get rid of that. Let's reshuffle all the points. So instead of 40, 40, 40, 40, now it's 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay? And then I jiggled the other points and whatever. I did some other things to make it work within my point structure because I did not want to increase the total number of points it was worth. So I was hopeful that this would be useful. And one of the things I immediately noticed when I did this is that it changed my feedback. So instead of like 5 minutes of, oh my God, you've got to fix all these things. It's still 5 minutes of, oh my God, you have to fix all these things. But in the context of, but this is only worth 10 points. Okay. We can fix it. We can make it better. Here are the things you need to do and improve. I need to get you where you need to go. But the change being, I don't necessarily need to have you there at the first assignment. We're going to try to move you towards there. That's what we did, but I know did I skip slides? No. Okay. So any questions on what the heck it was that I did? Oh, anybody on Zoom? Good there. All right, so did I just make this up? Why should this work? Again, I do have a background in psychology, so I have some understanding of psychological concepts. And I wanted to link this for you to very famous psychological concept from our friend Vygotsky, something called the zone of proximal development. So if you've not heard about the zone of proximal development before, it's the difference between what the student already knows when they walk into the class, what they're never going to be able to do, right? Because it's just impossible at their particular developmental level. And then the area between is that zone of proximal development. So that's where you're hoping to move the student from what they already know to what you ideally want them to know so that they can do that later on. So can't do, can do by themselves. This is where we're hoping to improve skills. So this kind of idea is consistent with what's going on with our friend Vygotsky. So giving them these more detailed prompts is likely, I hope, an example of scaffolding. So scaffolding is a concept from Vygotsky. The term, of course, comes from scaffolding on buildings. Right? So when you're trying to do something with a building and it might fall over, you put the scaffolding up first. Right? So giving them all this extra information, I hope, is a way of scaffolding them into moving them through that zone of proximal development. I also had an extra concern, and one of the other reasons I did all this stuff is because, like I said, if you give students a sample essay, they all write almost the same essay. And if the first person who posts on a topic, if their post is really bad, guess what happens? Now you get 3 or 4 other essays that are making exactly the same mistakes. So the more stuff you can do to try to prevent that from happening in a situation where they're looking at other people's work, the better. And they always ask me, can I get an example? And I'm like, no, you can't, and I don't want you to, and please don't look at anybody else's writing before you do your post, which they completely. It's like, oh, I just found these errors 2 posts ago. We won't mention that. So we don't want those poor writing skills modeled ideally. That's the hope. And of course, if they do better earlier on, that's going to aid with them being more likely to stay in the class. They're gaining confidence. Hey, I can do this. I can improve. Hopefully everything is good. Here are some more arguments. If I'm still trying to convince you and you haven't already been wowed and said, oh my God, I'm going to go implement this in all my classes. How many teachers do we actually have anywhere? I don't know. I'm going to tell all the teachers that report to me to implement this in all their classes during their triennial evaluations. So we hope that this might reduce dropout rates, right? So when you get this door in the face and your first writing assignment comes out and it's bad and there are all these problems and it's worth 40 points, a significant amount of your grade in my classes, don't know how many points are in this class, so don't ask me offhand. That may make them also less likely to be retained, more likely to drop out. Now they have to take the course again, they've spent money, you know, we've now doubled down on the privilege problems too. So not good. I already mentioned this. So my feedback immediately became more supportive because I was working more towards building skills rather than assessing skills that were already there. Okay. And I treated these early ones more like drafts. So doing something a little bit similar to what English is doing, but instead of doing one big thing over and over, which is not a bad thing, there's any English teachers, right? Instead of doing one thing over and over, you're just doing 4 shorter things, trying to get to the same place. Questions from anybody? Anything so far?
In terms of the feedback, like, were there things that you found yourself sort of prioritize? You mentioned already in terms of your feedback changed when you went to the 10 points, 20, 30, 40 points. Were there things that you found, like, for you with teaching this course, you had to sort of prioritize this as in the sense of, here's the 3 things that students are going to have to do by paper 4. I'm going to keep giving that one and let these things kind of slide. Like, what to you took top priorities? Weirdly
enough, the lowest priority ended up being the content, right? What? Okay. But keep in mind, this is 218, okay? So these are a lot of nursing students, so these are not average students. The content was usually not the problem. Okay, I mean, some students blew it, but I think with all my stuff and my subtopics, the content was usually there. Sometimes there were problems, like just, we didn't do the things I asked you to do. You did not bring in citations. So a lot of it honestly was structural. Because that's the goal. I think they can do the content. They're showing me they can do the content. They're also showing me they're not ready to write in a 300 level class. Okay? So usually it would go something like this. And not necessarily in order. So I would look at, do you have an introduction? Does your introduction list your 3 topics, subtopics in order? Okay. And then if there were really basic terms that should have been defined, were they defined? But that's not something for point. They can do that later in the paper, but sometimes they'll do that. Okay. Then I would look at the conclusion next for exactly the same thing. Do you have a conclusion? Does it reiterate your main topic and your 3 subtopics in the same order? These are not hard things, but they just don't know this stuff. They don't know how to write in psychology. Then I would look at each subparagraph. I'm looking at, was it introduced? Do I know what the topic is at the beginning? Then I'm looking for, do you have at least 1 citation? At the time I was doing kind of anything citations, so they could use the book, they could use an outside source. I've changed that now to require them to use the book because ChatGPT is much worse at making up quotes from the assigned textbook than it is from just pulling. I started getting essays coming in where I was like, there is no way. There's no way they pulled this weird, obscure, like journal article off Google Scholar for this thing worth this many points. It just did not happen. So looking for the citation, looking for the application. So their research stuff that they've done, and then looking to make sure that there's integration between those 2. So that's basically everything I'm looking for. And then, you know, I mean, can I read the English? Okay. But that's really what I care about. And if they have an outside citation, is there a bibliography? And I don't honestly care if it's APA even or MLA. Okay. So don't tell. What I care about in this course is, did you give me enough information to find it? And if it's an online source, did you give me a working link? And that last bit is not APA. So that's my own personal requirement. So that's kind of what I'm going through. And then I'm giving them feedback on that stuff kind of in that order.
Is that mapped out for them on a rubric?
Of course,
Okay.
yes, of course. Oh, you have
Like
no
diligence
idea, Justin, you have no idea. Email me and I will send you, I mean, some of it's in the syllabus, but most of it is in something called my discussion handout. Okay, and it literally starts with a picture of a 5-paragraph essay. And I know there's a lot of stuff in the media about ditch the hamburger. Like, stop the 5-paragraph essay. And it's like, well, I can't, because that's how it works in psychology. I thought that was heavier. Yes,
Yeah.
impressive. I can move heavy things with my mind.
Did you say that was embedded in the syllabus?
The writing handout is a separate one just for editing reasons and because it also has a table of contents.
So that wouldn't be found on CurriculumNet, would it?
No. The syllabus also has a lot, but just email me. I am happy to share the discussion handout. I actually just shared it with some random person from a Facebook group on the teaching of psychology. She's like, I need a thing. I'm like, DM me, I'll send you a thing. So it's very long, it's very detailed. It starts with how to write an appropriate 5-paragraph essay. I mean, it is all the things. Right? And some of them don't read it, so it goes horribly, but trust me. I have spent my entire career trying to head off the student problems before they happen. It's been a lot.
And it seems natural that they ask for examples, and I completely understand why you say no. You know, that then that's what it becomes, but could you give them, what if you gave them an example of bad writing and then graded it like you would, like, don't, like Tyler uses the goofus and gallant, you know, it's like, don't turn this in because this is what it's going to look like would that satisfy it? Because maybe they just think, well, if I just know what she's looking for, then I can do it. But maybe that would be a way around them than just modeling that from content. Or if you did, like, just make something up, pretend and write a sociology paper or a poli-sci paper.
I like that. And I actually saw the same thing somewhere on that same Facebook. I just joined that Facebook group, so of course I'm getting bombarded with emails from that particular Facebook group. And that person actually suggested, you know what would be good for doing that? AI. Given these directions, write a bad paper and create errors and all,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think, thanks AI, I think this would actually be pretty easy to do and
Yeah,
implement.
like, don't be this guy.
Yeah, so for the fall, that may be showing up, that's an excellent idea, Lisa, thank you so much, I love it.
If I can ask one more question too, like, so I'm interested like in the resources given to students. You mentioned so feedback, they're doing drafts, you mentioned giving them kind of external sites too, like, oh, here's things that can help with citations. Were there other things you found in terms of like, especially I'm thinking the online asynchronous that, oh, here's just something that can take some of the workload away from you as a sort of the sole person gonna teach them writing, like, oh, here's a resource to use, here's such and such thing.
Yeah, I mean, they've got links in there for APA, but honestly, when you see this handout, your head is gonna explode.
Okay. Nice.
So almost all of it is integrated into this one place. And then everything else says, you best have read the discussion handout in capitals and underlined, or, you know, don't do this until you've done the thing.
And I like that makes a lot of sense to centralize it, because I can see the challenge of like, oh, here's like 10 different resources of learning how to write, and I'm not gonna choose any of those 10 as a student, I'm just gonna get overwhelmed, yeah.
Yeah, and it's that is all in my voice, so one-stop shopping, I'm the one that's grading it. And then there's lots and lots of ideas about, and there's a second handout on how to do interviews appropriately, on how to front end. Make sure you're picking your topics first. Don't try to do your interviews and then try to wedge them into it, because it does not work. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in there. We can always use more stuff, but when you start putting so many links in there, they just stop clicking on them. I mean, that's easy to tell. Anything that's extra, good luck with that.
That makes sense.
If it's not tied directly to an assessment. Or they're not struggling. Often when they struggle, then they will be willing to go
Okay.
to the secondary stuff. And of course, the right center,
Mhm.
right? I will often suggest to students, if they're really not close and I don't think they can get there, like really you should consider going to the right place. Like, bring in the prompt. I'm sure they've heard of me over there. Bring in the prompt, and that's often if there's issues with like the integration
Okay.
part. If they're having problems there, that's something that I think the right place is pretty good at.
Okay.
This just doesn't work or make sense. Organizational level, I have all the support.
Okay.
When it's that kind of thing, what do you say? Integrate better. I can't, that's gone beyond me. Now I'm like, help, right place, help.
Right.
Excellent question. Any other questions? In the room from the peanut gallery? I remember you exist, I promise.
Yep, so one question in chat is, maybe this is a question more for the next groups, the next session, but what about writing for prompting AI? And Sonal, if you want to unmute, feel free to, if there's anything you want to elaborate on there, but what about writing for prompting AI was the question as it's written.
Yeah, well, I see, so I come from the
Or unmute, feel
CDN.
free to always follow up later too.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I will tell you that in Psych 100 last semester, I got very, very sick by the end of the semester of having to hand out high grades to work I knew bloody well, was ChatGPT generated, which Dr. Garcia is intimately familiar with. And I actually did run all my prompts through ChatGPT repeatedly, which gave me an idea about how ChatGPT writes answers. And there were consequences.
Can you guys
There
hear
were
me?
6 students who flunked my course by the end. And that
Can you
was
hear me?
about 30 hours of work. And there were way more than that. Those were just the ones where it was glaringly obvious. I also tried it for my 218 class, not so successful. And ChatGPT was not good at that. And you can tell when those essays come in because they only have half. They have the content half and they don't have the application half, because ChatGPT will lie, but it won't lie to the level of, I talked to my grandmother and she said this specific thing about this topic. It all gets like generalized, and then they're not doing well in the grading anyway. So I don't know if that was actually the question, but that's
So
what I felt
trying to
like
unmute,
answering.
might type in the chat, we're having some technical difficulties right now, getting the unmute and going, so. Once, feel free to go move forward, and I'll bring it up when she types up, so.
Okay, so let's see what it did. So you're not gonna be super impressed by these graphs, but that is because I don't like to lie with statistics. So all of my things have a 0. They start at 0. And so I did not mess with the range on these results. So the results are gonna look small. I could have made them look really big by starting it at like 50%. I chose not to do that. So just FYI. So success measures. So comparing the original investigative prompts with the prompts with the additional details on subtopics, and then also comparing those with what's going on when I change the point structure. So this part is just looking at grades. It's actually the less interesting part. The survey data is more interesting, I think. So we're looking at overall grades on the writing components. We're looking at the course of those grades over time. And then we're looking at different scores between earlier or later. Are they improving? Is this changing what's going on with their improvement? And keep in mind, these are very different cohorts. These groups all happened at very different times. And between the second and the third one, like COVID happened. So it probably did weird things. I did remove 0 scores from all data sets for obvious reasons. I would have done very weird things. So this is looking at the average total writing grade. This is why I warned you it's not going to look that impressive. So we're looking at visually not large differences, but you can see that there's an uptick with this last group. So when I change the points, you can see the overall writing grade compared to previously is above 80%, which is the first time I got it, above 80%. So I think that putting more points at the end point-wise has done some of this, but like I said, this is not like the impressive part of the data. The impressive part of the data is what did the students think about this, which we will get to in a second. So this is looking at writing by unit. Okay, so unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. Keep in mind when I did this, I did some weird things, like I took out some points. I didn't have them do the reply post in the first unit. I made it actually extra credit in the last unit. And so the one on the left is the original one. So you can see that they were improving. So I guess my feedback wasn't terrible. So improving. You can see this happened when I gave these detailed prompts, and you might be looking at that and you're like, well, that's not good. Where'd the improvement go? Okay. But I actually feel like this flattening was kind of what I wanted when I added these prompts. I wanted them to be more consistent. I wanted them to be better at the beginning. So you're seeing, first of all, that these grades are higher than they were over here. Okay. Consistency, a little bit of uptick, and then a significant uptick by the time we get to unit 4. So it seemed like those prompts did what I wanted them to do, and it created better writing earlier in the course. And then you can see over here what happened with the points. Here you get this nice up, up, up. Now you can see for this particular cohort, they did not start off in the same place as others, but increase, and then we saw a little bit of dip in unit 4. I don't know why. Maybe they were happier with their grades. Didn't put as much effort into the last
And if
one.
you were improving your within course retention through this.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have,
Flatter results.
that's
I
an
mean, it makes
excellent,
sense.
excellent point.
Yeah.
I'm glad I have a data person. Yeah, if I'm retaining more of those students who might have
right.
been like at a D and then end up at a C, but they're in the group whereas they were
Right,
not before.
Right, and that's a positive outcome, so.
Awesome. Make a note. Take Lisa's idea. If I get this again. Retention. Better. Excellent. Any other comments on this kind of boring quantitative data? Doing on time, we're all right.
Quantitative data is not boring.
I love it too, but this, I was like, okay, it's kind of doing what I thought it would do, but between the cohort effects, I wouldn't rely too much on any of these numbers, frankly. So then I looked at the difference scores. So just straight up unit 4 versus unit 1. And you can see at least visually, this is much more appealing. It looks like something happened. And you can see definitely I flattened the curve with those prompts. Okay, so difference scores went down a lot than they did from the original ones, which is not a bad thing. And if they're doing better at the beginning. And then you can see, hopefully here, this difference scores means, you know, here we've got more improvement. Maybe they're trying harder now later in the course. My feedback is better. I was nicer. I don't know. And then I lumped 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4 just to see if it did anything different. And you can see not so much. Okay. So the difference scores were larger for our original shorter prompts. Inclusion the prompts is flattening the curve. I already talked about that. And the addition of the progressive points is an improvement over the prompts. Right, but not here, but like I said, these are old people. Some people from years ago, let's just ignore them. Okay, but their difference scores are gonna be higher, right, because they had to improve more. Okay, whereas they were hopefully already in a better place. All right, so the interesting stuff. The interesting results for me were actually the survey data. It was long. They got a little bit of extra credit for completing this, 5 points or whatever. Don't be borderline, do the 5-point thing or you will get nothing at the end. You have 79.43, you're out of luck. You did not do this assignment. So most of these were a standard scale with, I liked this very much more, somewhat more, whatever. Not as good as other classes, really bad compared to other classes. And of course, I told them to compare this with non-English classes, although who knows if that's what they did. But that was the idea. I also asked about auditory versus visual feedback. I can't remember if that data is in here, probably, maybe not. Comparing your detailed prompts, what's going on with the point structure, and then I had free responses from students to tell me what they thought about everything. And this is comparing the results to the very old ones. So this is to the 2015 data here. And there really was not a lot there. So you can see there's only one thing that's highlighted. These two are highlighted. So not a lot of difference in interest in psych. And the overall type of writing hasn't changed. Our later students were less interested in the writing, could be for any number of reasons. They said it was harder, again, could be for any number of reasons. And these are not big differences numerically. They spent a little bit more time, that's not going to be significant, etc. And then this, so the helpfulness of feedback. Okay. So they did say that they thought that the feedback was much more helpful later on. So I think that's supporting my idea that it's changed the way that I give feedback, which is making them feel like it's more effective feedback, even though it's the same feedback. It's just feedback that's nicer and with a more positive, uplifting tone at the end. Okay. And here's the preference for auditory feedback. So they still preferred that versus visual feedback. So 3.74 on a 5-point scale. So pretty significant. I do swap to written feedback in like unit 3 because some students do prefer the written feedback. So some of this, some of the other, yeah.
For the auditory feedback, did you just record that on D2L or how did you provide that feedback?
I use an external voice recorder because I don't know, I haven't tried the D2L one in a while, but when I tried it back in the day, it's not good.
Yeah.
And these are long, and sometimes these are like 5-minute recordings. So I feel like D2L has more oopsies. So I do it in external file. I save the file. I attach the file to an email with what the heck is this so that they can listen to it. And then, sometimes I send the wrong one or forget to attach it. But that's good because they're all labeled and I don't have to go back into the email if I want to figure out what the heck did I say to the student. Or if a student says this grade is not right and I figure out, oh, I must have mixed it up with someone else, which happens, especially when you've got the same last name for multiple students. And especially in an online class, since you don't actually know them face to face. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide. So this is the pre-response section on what do they think about the essays in this course, and what they liked. So they liked options. No, not surprising there. They thought it was fun to get able to pick and choose, even though it makes my job a lot harder, especially now with ChatGPT and Psych 100. Because for each unit I have 6 prompts, right? It's a lot to try to keep track of, but they like it. They actually said, this was from the original data, that making them use citations made them read the book and that was a benefit. I was like, oh no, oh no, what do you mean make you read the book? Right? Were you not reading the book before? Okay. But that's why I didn't feel so bad now about requiring them to cite the textbook, because that's what my students were telling me. Right? These citations make some of us look at the textbook. So let's keep that. They like these essay questions because they're deep digs. They get other people's perspectives. They like that they are somewhat creative. My Psych 100 essays are much more creative. Unfortunately, it turns out AI can do that too. And it's often funnier than real students are. Okay. They loved, like I said, they love spending time with people in their family and getting to know people as a result of these essays. They actually said it was fun to reply to other people's posts, some of them. Okay. They liked the spaced out deadlines, so rather than one giant research paper, okay, they liked that they had more smaller papers. Seeing connections between material in different parts of the course, because they're limited by like age group to some degree, but they can always go back. Like I always say, you can always go back and talk about theory. You can always go back and relate this to Piaget and Vygotsky. You know, that stuff is there the whole semester. So they're able to connect that stuff a little bit more. They're including their own input, realizing their skills. I was like, yes. Some of them said it helped them with the exams, which I thought was surprising because this is a small amount of material in depth. But hey, if it works, it works.
Because they read the book.
Yeah, they read the book. And not extremely long. So like I said, this is comparison with non-English essays, not with English course essays. So this is the impressive data. So this is surveying them. Here's the question. You were given essay prompts with subtopics. How useful do you feel this is compared to the guidance you've received for similar writing assignments in other courses? And it's very obvious that whether it's directly affecting their grades to a large degree or not, they think this is awesome. Okay, which I imagine would be good for student evaluations if any students actually filled out student evaluations anymore. Hint, hint. Into the Zoom audience. I'd like feedback that is useful again, and I have not had it for a long time. But luckily, I'm far into my career, so hopefully I got all of that early on when they actually had to fill them out in class. So here's one student voice from this particular area. So very helpful, organization was easy, it made them less stressed out, less like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing, more confident. And so they did not have to spend time trying to figure out what the heck subtopics make sense. They could just pick them and move forward. I was like, yay. Here's the free response on the use of subtopics. Most of this is as expected. And as we kind of just talked about, let's see if there's anything in here we have not discussed. They could use keywords, they could use their index, they could use their book more. We talked about that. It gave them ideas for things they might not have thought of, but were interested in, because presumably it should be easier for me than them to figure out what subtopics might make sense. So I thought that was cool. They said it fit well for different writing styles. And again, like they really think it was helping them on the exams. I was amazed that I got more of that feedback because I had seen it in 2015 and I was like, that's like a one-off, I'll never see that again. But no, that came back. Okay. They also said that other students' work helped them out, and if the other students' work is less bad, that obviously is extremely helpful because they're actually learning more things from other students in essays that are well organized, and they're getting lots and lots of samples because, oh, I didn't mention this, but of course, when I go and I do the grading, any of my students who are up at the A level, I always tag their work. And I don't tag it specifically because FERPA, right? But I tag their work and say, good job here. You know, you made an excellent point, la-di-da. And then when the students say, the students who do very poorly, I will say, you want to look around the forums and look for the posts that I've tagged with a response. Because those are the ones that are good role models for you. Should have mentioned that. Kind of important part. So they don't get those examples on the front end, but they do get examples from other students once they exist.
And you vetted them.
Yes, and I have vetted them. I know those are the ones that are A's. I'm like, if they follow this kind of organization, they're going to be in good shape. These are the A-level papers. But I do still love this idea of doing the bad paper assignment. Definitely, because I need more things in my course. Because if I don't tie it to points, they're not gonna pay attention to it, so now we got another assignment thing.
How old is your Dropbox? You can probably find some bad work and just go.
I thought about that. Like, but I would want something, this is why I think AI could be helpful. I would want something that's like structurally wrong on all parts of my rubric, except spelling and grammar.
Yeah.
It can have that right. But I wanted to have problems in all of these areas, so I would give it a list and say, create problems for this.
Yeah.
So I can detail those.
Yeah, or make that an assignment and say, here's a piece of work, here's my rubric.
Yeah, good luck with that.
You want a scavenger hunt.
We could always do a quiz where they try, like we could do a writing to learn, okay? Where they just kind of try to respond to that, and then they have the feedback of how I would grade it. and make it kind of a nothing, like they wrote something. I don't usually do that, but it might be workable for that. So it looks like an assessment, but it's really just making them pay attention. To read through it, note problems, and then in the response, is there a way to do that in D2L? Where the response screen actually gives them like a link or something,
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
piece of
exactly.
paper. I'll have to figure out if Christian will know if there's a way to do that. I could just, there's gotta be a way to put like a link. I could always host it on a Google Drive. Say, okay, here's how I would have graded this. Excellent. Other things I said, how are we on time? Okay, gotta move a little bit faster, but we're pretty good on time. So they also said reduced likelihood of major errors or just not doing it. And I was probably having that issue and probably did not even know it. Where I had students not doing the work and I assumed they're just the ones who aren't gonna do anything. And it may have actually been that this writing assignment in particular. They were doing the essays and then they're like, oh, we'll just not do the writing, which would not end well for them. So this is the point structure. And like we saw, it didn't make major differences in the grades, but it's in the direction I would have supposed. So a lot of my students are strongly preferring this progressive point structure. Very few are strongly preferring equal point structures. I don't understand it, honestly, but we'll look at what they had to say on the next slide. There's a couple of points from students that might make that data make sense. But a typical response, they liked it when it progressed. At the beginning, they were difficult and they were getting used to the format. Towards the end, they felt more confident submitting their work. And it made me feel better knowing as I got better, so did my scores. If each essay was the same amount of points, I probably would have had a low midterm grade and really struggled in this class. Success, at least for one student, success. So this is what they had to say about progressive points. Almost all of this in the free response section was positive. So the students who tanked the first essay were super happy. It was only worth 10 points and they got a chance to fix it. They could utilize my feedback and they generally say my feedback is pretty good, although some of my students say I'm mean. But I have more and more students saying I'm nice and kind and I'm like, I guess it happened with age. Mellowed. Who would have thought? They utilized the feedback. They had time to learn my expectations. Because I guess they couldn't memorize the whole discussion handout that has a table of contents I haven't mentioned. Some just said, it makes sense. I minimalized on that midterm grade. So again, looking at drop levels. So midterm grade is less affected by this. I have time to figure it out in the second half of the class, a little bit kind and understanding. Some of the negatives, they didn't like that if you botched the later essays, it had a big effect on your grade. Right? No surprise there. I don't know. Maybe they don't like it. It's all at the end of the semester. Right? So more pressure later in the course, but little do they realize that the students that came before them had all the pressure for the entire course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, caveats, problems with this data. Besides the obvious cohort effect problems, because these are different years and we had COVID and all the things. Some of the other problems in the literature, some people might say that all of these details is a problem because it may hamper their autonomy and creativity, but what my students are saying is that they think that these are creative. So I'm not super concerned about that. Boring, already said that. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Okay, moving on. So I wanted to summarize some ideas from the literature on best practice with doing writing and discipline. First of all, being not one giant writing assignment. Okay. So advanced provision of rubrics. I think most of us do this. It's pretty much required at ECC. Like if you do a writing assignment, there better be a rubric or at least some type of thing, even if it doesn't break it all down by this is worth 2 points. They better know what they're being assessed on. But I also wanted to point out here that some research says that only using a rubric for feedback is problematic. So it's probably not uncommon, I have no idea, but probably not uncommon that students hand in writing, you put the rubric in D2L or whatever, you make some check marks and it spits out a grade. And without getting that kind of extensive verbal or what would be verbal but is written feedback. So that's a caution, like just grading on a rubric is not a best practice. Because they can't figure it out, or they wouldn't have made the error in the first place, unless it's just low effort. And that's not helping so much. So it's hard for them to find where their errors are. And whereas when I'm giving my feedback, it's always intro, conclusion, 1, 2, 3, so it's in order. In-text comments, students think are much more useful than general rubric feedback or God forbid, if anyone does this, holistic feedback, where you just slap a grade on it. Like, that's the version where you just take the papers and throw them down the stairs. Like, okay, you guys get A's. Fantastic. Other best practices, use of different writing assignments to assess specific types of skills. So you could do stuff with citation. I'm not a big stickler on that because it's a 200 level class. I like dip my toes into that and then hope they take English 102, because that's really where they should be learning this stuff. And literature review, again, kind of outside the scope in my mind of a 200 level class. So this is kind of more high level advice. Highlighting student work that meets or exceeds expectations and how it does. So that's one of the reasons I'm giving my, hey, this is a great post because of X, Y, or Z. The only other thing, sometimes I have to create content errors. I have to correct those. So occasionally I have to be like, I'm sorry, but this is not true. Guess I could just start hiding those essays from everybody else. No, I think it's better to address it. I should not be working on class prep during this. So, thank you. Okay. Use of writing tutoring or required conferences, but hello, I have 30 students. So I'm sure there are faculty out there who are doing like individual consultations on their writing with I do not have the time for that. I do not, I mean, I get paid pretty well, don't get me wrong. Okay, but I don't get paid to work 80 hours a week. So I do not do this. I'm sure people do this. I'm sure it happens a lot more in writing classes, and I'm guessing a lot of that happens inside of the classroom rather than outside. With 30 students, I don't know how to do that. I could require them to come talk to me. I don't think it would help much, but if anyone's been successful with that, let me know. Peer review, I am not a fan. Okay. I think at higher levels, this makes sense, and at the 1 and 200 level, it doesn't, because the other students don't have the skill to do peer review effectively. But if you have your class set up right, that can be helpful. There's also problems with who you're getting, right? So if someone happens to peer review your writing and they're an A-level student, they already know the stuff down cold, you're gonna get a lot back. You're gonna get useful stuff, almost like as if your teacher gave you the feedback, right? But if you happen to get one of those low students who doesn't know it, then it's completely useless to you. Right, so that is not necessarily helping out all the students equitably. I mean, you get 2 students who don't know what they're doing and you put them together, you've just wasted everybody's time, in all likelihood. So if you can get that to work, maybe, right? But if I were doing this, I would be looking at, like, I would do one assessment and then look at skill levels and make sure I do not create errors that are both students who did poorly on the previous assessment. That would be what I do. I did the same thing when I used to make static groups in Psych 100. I would ask them if they had had success in a previous psychology course in high school, and then I would make sure to divvy up all the ones who said they did a C or better and they've already had high school psych so that they were spread. Now I just do it randomly and I change it up every class. I don't know if that's better or worse. Informal writing to learn activities, we talked about those. Those can be helpful. Like I said, I don't really do this. If I needed to find a place to put more assignments in my class, I would, but my students would kill me if I added any more things to my class. They have a lot of different things. Use of personal life experiences. I think we all know that that's helpful, and there is a way to integrate these into essays. And so we don't need to be doing just this content stuff, those dry, and those are boring to grade too. Like, who wants to grade that? And of course, in the day of ChatGPT, forget it. You're gonna get 30 answers that are all gonna be exactly the same unless you have them grounded in their real life. And even then, I have bad news for you. ChatGPT will make it up, happily. I had an essay in circadian rhythms, and I had maybe 4 or 5 come in that all had the exact same formatting with different times on it, but all the exact same formatting and what they did in the same order. When they woke up, like when they pooped, there was nothing I could do about that one. I couldn't prove it, but it was bad. Note taking and persuasive writing can also be helpful. Just in general, man, they don't take notes. It drives me nuts. And then we have a bibliography. So we have 5 minutes. 5 minutes for other questions.
To return to Sonal's earlier question, she's writing, there's a question about sort of AI and use of AI a little bit for prompting. She writes in the chat, I teach design, so I can see designers using AI to help us out as an art director rather than doing actual writing and designing and being in the weeds, but more of sort of managing and guiding the end product, which I sort of take to mean, Sonal, correct me if I'm wrong on this, like in design, it can be helpful to sort of, with writing, have AI helped begin that process that students sort of take over towards the end of, ooh, AI can generate the initial sort of prompt, generate some of the initial pieces for me that designers then might sort of jump into later on. Oh, let me correct the content, let me correct these sort of pieces. Do you have thoughts on sort of if that would work, if that sort of hinder ideas you're thinking about?
Well, I feel like I'm taking that job from ChatGPT. I mean, I feel like that would work, right? If I told them, let's say I went back to the very beginning prompts without all of those details, right? And I told them, okay, take this prompt, and when you're trying to figure out what your subtopics are, maybe run it through ChatGPT and it could give you some ideas, but I feel like I've taken ChatGPT's job by trying to do that myself. I feel like they have so much structure. And I already know. And plus, I love all these subtopics because it makes it, if they just dump the whole prompt into ChatGPT like that in these classes, it just vomits stuff out. But yeah, I think that's very workable. I just feel like I'm trying to do that.
Different way to sort of support them at an early stage. Yeah, different type of scaffolding, as you mentioned, yeah.
I don't want to tell them to go anywhere near that thing,
Mhm.
to be honest. It's so not good. Okay, other questions? We got 2.5 minutes.
One just comment I'll make real quick is, on a previous slide, you mentioned like the student sharing, you don't have to go back to that, I can just talk through it, like students giving the feedback that they liked how much that this was at the beginning of the course. And just like reiterating that, I think is such an important point, because you mentioned like, oh, requiring the final research essay, and the feedback I've gotten from a lot of faculty, and especially non-writing classes, is I didn't know my students couldn't write until I collected that final paper and realized, oh,
Yep.
there's big problems.
Nice.
Helping the students in the beginning, helping you from the beginning, it makes so much sense and it's so intuitive, but I could see taking a lot of faculty a long time to kind of come to like, oh, this has to be built in from the very beginning of this course. So I just love that point.
And it's spreading out the grading.
Yep.
So instead of having lost multiple weekends every time something like that was due, now it's, I lost 6 to 9 o'clock a couple of times. But and that gets compensated because the first writing assignment isn't due for a while. So my grading load is pretty low until that first thing comes in.
My husband teaches criminology and got caught with, okay, APA format, and that was a big portion of his rubric. And then he got papers coming in that were using MLA or, and he said, okay, well, if they were doing it bad or there was none at all, but they did it, I think, well in MLA, but my rubric says APA. Can I give him, like he had this crisis.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, lesson learned, but so then he took some time to say, okay, did you know there's different ways of citing and that's done by discipline and, so that helped him just to introduce that topic, that what you learned in English might be different from speech, might be different from biology.
so,
So
I
just
mean-
introducing the concept that citations are
Exists.
different. It's crazy, and depending on where you go, you might decide what to do
And that's,
but
I
just be
guess here I
aware.
am shouting yay for computer. I mean, let's face it. If I'm gonna do a bibliography and I'm not sure how to use APA, there's a million online sources where it just asks you to put in the information and it spits out
Mhm.
the APA correct citation.
But if you don't know that APA is different from MLA or that another thing, and you go find source citation, you might be going down the wrong.
Yeah, my stuff says prefer APA, I
Excellent.
think, but then also give me a link to online sources, which is not APA.
Yeah.
So then I can't be a stickler about APA anyway. And God, the last thing I want to be doing is trying to give them verbal feedback on why their APA citations are not
Right.
formatted correctly. I'm sorry, you didn't italicize the right thing. You italicize the thing inside the paren, but it should be. This is why, you get to you're doing a master's degree. This is why we hire editors. I did not want to be in charge of that stuff myself. Actually, I did do it all myself for my master's, but for my doctorate, I farmed it out because I did not want to be dealing with it. And give myself a pat on the back for doing that for my master's, because that was not nothing. As a poor graduate student, I was not paying for an editor. All right, well, we are at time and I'm sure people have lunch or another talk. I don't know how backed up these are to each other. So if you have questions, email me. Are these PowerPoints going somewhere in general?
Yes, if you're good with it, we'll put it up on the CEDL site, all the slides, recordings from this week for folks, and we'll circulate that out. So thank you very much, Jessica. This is really helpful. A lot of things in the chat as well. So thank you very, very much.
And thanks to ECC for providing the sabbatical that underwrote most of this research. Ciao, Zoomers.
Indeed.
Thank you.